Hello viewers, this is Censor Space asking about your thoughts. President Trump recently said that he has never heard of President Putin directly supporting Russia's actions. President Trump said he would impose strong sanctions on Russia. Today we will look at this topic. On May 25th, 2025, President Trump made a bombshell statement to reporters at New Jersey Morristown Airport. He said he didn't know what the problem was with Putin and wondered what had happened to him. He said that he has killed many people and that he doesn't listen to anyone. President Trump also said, "I used to get along well with Putin, but Putin is killing people who are protesting in the city and doesn't listen to anyone." He also hinted at possible additional sanctions against Russia. Let's find out why President Trump said this. Afterwards, Russia launched missile attacks from the 24th to the 25th, carrying out airstrikes on more than 30 cities in Ukraine. This was the largest scale airstrike since 2025. As a result, at least 12 people were killed and more than 60 were injured across Ukraine. It is said that among the victims there were also children. Because of this, President Trump expressed deep regret. President Trump's remarks are being evaluated as his first public criticism of President Putin. Previously, President Trump had displayed a friendly stance toward President Putin, complimenting him and urging for the removal of more sanctions. However, President Trump's position is gradually shifting. This announcement suggests President Trump's actual influence on the situation remains limited. President Trump emphasized that the military operation against Ukraine could end in just one day and expressed his hope to restore peace through active diplomacy. He called to end aid to Ukraine and stop providing information directly, showing a pro-Russian stance aligned with Russia's position. However, it was merely a symbolic gesture. Russia continues to attack Ukraine, rejecting United States peace proposals and maintaining its offensive against the country. President Trump tried to mediate between Russia and Ukraine and even had direct talks, but outside of these diplomatic gestures, there was no real progress. The United States has stated that if negotiations stall, it will halt aid. The Wall Street Journal reported that President Trump and President Putin recently had a 2-hour phone call. Although both leaders agreed on the importance of peace negotiations through the phone call, they were unable to narrow their fundamental differences. In the case of Russia, their position was that peace negotiations should only take place if Ukraine's demilitarization, neutrality, withdrawal of military support, and guarantees of Russia's political influence are all satisfied. On the other hand, the United States maintained the position that peace negotiations should begin immediately. The positions of both sides are too far apart. President Trump said he didn't believe Putin would end the war and communicated with major European leaders, suggesting that if Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire, he might reimpose sanctions. This is also the first time that President Trump has directly said that President Putin has no intention of ending the war. Previously, President Trump had repeatedly said that Putin sincerely wanted peace and emphasized this in various remarks. So President Trump is still expected to actually implement stronger additional sanctions against Russia. When asked in an interview with reporters whether he was still planning to impose additional sanctions on Russia, President Trump answered ambiguously, saying, "We'll see." President Trump disapproved, stating that President Putin has killed many people. Bloomberg News reported that the Trump administration's new sanctions may target Russia's sovereign debt or state-owned oil company, Rosneft. However, even if sanctions are imposed on Russia, there are many situations where Russia has already adapted to these sanctions, and in many cases they have found ways to bypass them, so there are questions about how effective these sanctions will actually be. If economic sanctions could have ended the war, Russia would have given in to the pressure, but that's not what happened. It appears we can't significantly damage Russia. If so, what will happen in Ukraine? Let's re-examine the front lines there. Ukraine and Russia persist in launching drone and missile strikes in the eastern region. Recently, the Russian military has intensified its long-range attacks on Ukraine over the past 8 months. Since January 2025, they have carried out 7 large-scale drone and missile attacks, which is the highest frequency so far. Currently, Russia is continuing its drone and missile attacks on Ukraine, aiming to further weaken the morale of the Ukrainian people. They have recently continued efforts to supply weapons and provide humanitarian aid to civilians. The Russian military conducted airstrikes on Ukraine from May 24th to May 25th as confirmed. 9 missile launches occurred in Kharkiv, 55 cruise missile launches in Dnipro and Kharkiv, 1 in Kharkiv Airspace 4 in Russia's Bryansk region, and 298 incidents reported in Chernihiv and Sumy. They launched consecutive attacks. Ukraine attempted to resist the largest single-day attack, but was overwhelmed by the missiles and drones. Major Ukrainian cities were hit, resulting in at least 12 deaths and over 60 injuries. Also recently, attacks have continued in Crimea, and it is said that in 2025, more than 50 missiles were launched from Crimea. Ballistic and cruise missiles were initially launched. Many cruise missiles are believed to still be deployed in Crimea. It appears improbable that Russia will easily annex Ukraine or that Ukraine will swiftly expel the Russian army from Donbass. Both sides are exhausted militarily and in resources, making further advancement difficult for either. Both sides are gearing up for a prolonged standoff along the entire Donbas front line, constructing defensive facilities akin to World War I trench warfare, making rapid changes in the situation unlikely. Statistics show that as both sides get closer, their progress slows down. It is highly improbable that Russian forces will occupy Ukraine by 2025. The Population Research Institute's analysis suggests it would take Russia approximately 91 years to occupy all the territories Medvedev mentioned at the current rate. Assuming the population continues to grow annually for 91 years, analysis suggests there could be an additional 50 million people by the end of this period. In the end, there is almost no chance of the front lines changing. The Russian army has faced setbacks in Ukraine's Kharkiv region recently, being forced to defend rather than attack. This situation is expected to prolong the war further. According to confirmed reports, roughly 50,000 Russian troops are being deployed near the Kharkiv border. They are a combined force made up of various units. There are indications of a full-scale ground offensive against Kharkiv, as well as signs of other developments. Kharkiv, a strategic city in the northeast. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, is geographically close to the Russian border and a key northeastern industrial and logistics hub. Kharkiv's fall could likely shake the Donbas front. It's often called Ukraine's second capital. Before the war, about 1 million people lived in Kharkiv. Even now, a considerable number of civilians remain there. The Russian army has attacked with 50,000 troops, but the situation remains largely unchanged. In 2022, when Russia's army was stronger, they attempted to occupy Kharkiv but were unsuccessful. Back then, they failed due to supply issues in the division of forces. They couldn't capture Kharkiv in the end. Ukraine subsequently reinforced its defenses around Kharkiv, constructing anti-tank obstacles, underground bunkers, and multiple defensive lines. That's the known information. It doesn't look easy to break through this defensive line. Russia has a reason to keep attacking Kharkiv. If Russia manages to take Kharkiv, it will be able to complete a land corridor connecting Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Crimea. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city. It's actually the economic center of eastern Ukraine, and it's a place with enormous influence politically and diplomatically as well. If they secure just this, they could negotiate from a very advantageous position for Russia. But the Ukrainian defense is much tougher than expected, and that's the problem. As Western military support continues, the latest Western equipment has been deployed in large numbers to Kharkiv. Despite Russia's claim of breaching the defensive line, they face stronger resistance as they push further into Kharkiv. Urban warfare is a battle for the ground, so to end it without losses, the only way is to occupy the city. But Ukraine seems unlikely to do that, so the success of this offensive is questionable. The changes on this front and Russia moving forward mean that the Western world is abandoning Ukraine. Currently, Ukraine's war effort is almost entirely dependent on support from the Western world. However, if the West ends its support, Ukraine will no longer be able to continue its war effort. Russia's attack on Kharkiv is also an attempt to change the situation on the front lines. As the war continues, fatigue is gradually building up in the United States and Europe. Ukraine is increasingly viewed as someone else's problem, not ours. In some countries, public opinion is turning negative towards supporting Ukraine due to rising prices, refugee issues, and energy crises. However, in such a situation, if Russia manages to occupy Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, Russia will gain even more momentum. As time passes, the situation becomes more favorable for us. We want to convey this to the West to undermine their support for Ukraine. But looking at the current situation, it doesn't seem like the West is considering stopping its support for Ukraine. The United States and Europe continue to provide military, humanitarian, and financial aid to Ukraine. President Trump is directly criticizing President Putin and signaling a strong stance toward Russia. This suggests that if elected, United States policy could become even tougher on Russia. I hope this conflict does not go on any longer. President Trump has claimed that he could end the Ukraine war quickly and play the role of a mediator for peace. President Trump, a conservative populist, has engaged in anti-elite rhetoric and held large rallies, a pattern likely to persist. If President Trump proposes additional sanctions on Russia and aligns with the West, a rift could arise in President Putin's strategy. With continued United States support, Ukraine can maintain its front lines and effectively block Russia's reckless offensives, according to assessments. How do you think the war in Ukraine will end? Share your thoughts in the comments. That's all for this video. Thank you.